Kia ora koutou, welcome everyone to our webinar. I am Rebecca Makaray, your host for this webinar, and thank you for joining us online. This webinar is being run by the Urban Growth Partnership for Greater Christchurch on the conclusions of work on how we plan for accommodating future growth and how we might invest in our transport system in Greater Christchurch. Our presenters will explain more on the who, the what and the why of this work during this webinar. But before we start, we have a bit of information about how this will run before I hand over to the presenters, and then we'll have a question and answer time. So your mics and cameras have been switched off so that we can actually keep the session running smoothly. But you can ask questions in the Microsoft Teams chat, which is located on the top bar menu as a speech bubble. If you're not able to use either of those, you can email questions to huihui@greaterchristchurch.org.nz. If you're hard of hearing, or if you are experiencing sound issues, you can turn on live captions. Just click on the three small dots above More at the top of your Teams screen, and then click on Turn on Live Captions near the bottom of the drop-down list. And one last thing from me. Hopefully the banner has come up to let you know that the session is being recorded. This recording will be shared on our YouTube channel and website in the next few days. You will receive a link via email showing you how to access this recording, along with a copy of the PowerPoint slides from today. So presenters, would you please turn your cameras on? Today we have 4 presenters who will be taking us through different parts of the material. We have Tracy Tierney, and she is the General Manager of Planning, Regulation and Environment at the Waimakariri District Council. We have Tim Harris, who is the Group Manager of Development and Growth at Selwyn District Council. We have Richard Osborne, who is the Regional Manager System Design at Wakakotahi New Zealand Transport Authority, and we have Mark Stevenson, who is the Manager Planning at Christchurch City Council. We also have some technical experts and assistants working hard behind the screens to keep the session moving very smoothly, hopefully. The purpose of this webinar is to take you through the conclusions of the work to date on how we might accommodate future growth and invest in our transport system in Greater Christchurch, and then to answer your questions at the end. I'll now hand over to our first presenter to start the presentation.
Kia ora, Tracy Tierney, and really pleased to be joining you today and talk about what we've obviously been really excited to come out and be engaging with all of our communities on. So the Greater Christchurch Partnership, if you're not aware, is a partnership of the 4 councils. So it is ECAN, Christchurch City Council, Waimakariri and Selwyn, alongside Mana Whenua, Wakakotahi and Te Whata Ora. So it's been around in some form for over 15 years now, with a focus on coordinating urban and transport planning and transport investment in the city and the surrounding towns of Greater Christchurch. So the partnership is overseen and led by a committee of the mayors and other governance representatives from all the partners. It set the direction for urban planning actually quite a while ago in 2007. The agreed plan meant that they were able to respond really quickly after the 2010-2011 earthquake sequence, where they needed to find new places for people to live. So further in the development, early last year, the Greater Christchurch Partnership developed a more comprehensive partnership with the Crown through the Whakawhanake Kāinga Committee. So that's an urban growth partnership for Greater Christchurch. This brought ministers to the Greater Christchurch Committee table, included Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, Kāinga Ora, and the Ministry of Internal Affairs into the work. So you can tell quite a lot of history to that partnership and development now with Crown. There are 6 urban growth partnerships across New Zealand. Just changing to the next slide. These partnerships provide the opportunities for local government, Mana Whenua and central government to work collectively on the challenges and opportunities that we're all facing in urban New Zealand. The first really big key piece of work is to develop a joint spatial plan, which provides, I guess, that direction on how future population business growth will be accommodated in the urban area in a way that provides a really good quality life for our residents, a thriving economy, protects our environment and meets the expectations of Mana Whenua. So we've integrated this work in Greater Christchurch with the work that's been underway a while in the future in terms of public transport. So it makes sense to make sure that they're really well aligned and more specifically around how a mass rapid transit system might be part of this future. So it's trying to make sure we've got really joined up thinking for our joint communities and across our partnership. So a bit around the process for this. So it's not sprung up out of anywhere. There's been a heck of a lot of work and information that people have fed into that, including our community. So this work's been going on for a number of months. There are a real range of reports that have been produced along the way, which can be found along with a summary of all the work completed on our website, which is www.greaterchristchurch.org.nz. Importantly, the community engagement we have underway now is an opportunity to get feedback from the community that informs the development of the actual draft spatial plan, and also includes the indicative business case for mass rapid transit. The next steps after that is to actually draft the spatial plan to be out for the consultative process later in 2023. So this is a really engage and check where our thinking is and get a really genuine feedback before that is finalised into the draft spatial plan. If the MRT indicative business case is endorsed, it helps to unlock the next step of detailed analysis and planning for a business case. And you'll hear a bit more about that later. Just next slide. With regard to, this is all about our community. And in 2020, we sought community feedback for their aspirations in the Greater Christchurch 2050. Included in this feedback was a really strong youth voice because, of course, some of us would like to hope we're going to be here in 2050, but it may not be the case, and it's our young people we really also need to be hearing from. The feedback from all of this engagement was really clear and gave a very consistent message. And what we've heard from the community and other surveys engagement is that there's a real value around lifestyle, really important to access green and open spaces, really like that easy living in Greater Christchurch, growing concern around emissions, urban sprawl and protecting the environment. So again, clear messages around wanting that vibrancy, better access via public and active transport, affordable housing, streets and spaces that are designed for people. And this work that when we talk about the spatial plan is about giving effect to these aspirations. Next slide, please. Critical to that is our partnership with Mana Whenua, so who have also provided us really good, clear direction regarding priorities and expectations. The map shows some sites and areas of significance for Māori, including areas to protect like Waitapu, Waitonga, those are in the dark pink, and areas for development like Māori reserve land, which is shown here in the orange. They'd like us to do better at protecting Waitapu and Waitonga, a stronger emphasis on protecting and restoration of natural ecosystems and particularly waterways. They want kāinga no hanga to be enabled and actively supported through infrastructure investment on Māori land and enabled in early urban areas, Now, kāinga no hanga is about prosperous development of housing, economic activity and services that provide for the social, cultural and economic well-being of whānau and hapu. So this, as we say, a lot of this work has come and built from a lot of feedback from the community up until now. So it's really great to get it to the point where we can have this engagement with you. So I'm just going to hand over now to Tim.
Afternoon, everyone. Tim Harris. I work at the Selwyn District. I guess the first thing to note is that we're not starting from scratch here. As Tracy said, we've been working on this for the last nearly 2 decades now in terms of getting greater coordination between urban planning and transport investment. And at 2007, the Urban Development Strategy, one of the key themes there was around a consolidated urban form. We've had some success at that, but really the earthquakes 2010 and 2011, I guess, was a bit of a bump along the road towards consolidation. Obviously, there was huge impacts across the region. I think it was around 8,000 households were affected, had to be displaced and move somewhere else during those earthquakes. I think 90% of the residential property were damaged. And around 80% of the buildings in the central city were also badly affected and need to be demolished. So huge impacts. What that did was effectively pushed a lot of growth out, well, really there's a drift from east to the west a lot of growth went out to the districts, Waimakariri and Selwyn district. And this was necessary in terms of addressing some of those key issues that we faced during that period. What it did do is that it, I guess, generated a lot more greenfield development, a bit more, I guess, sprawl out into the districts than we'd intended through the direction set under the UDS. So effectively, what's happened is that we've grown at a, I guess, it's substantial rate, probably a bit higher than we'd anticipated back in the 2000s. And that growth has been more than we'd anticipated, out rather than up. So that's led to some significant challenges which we're trying to face today. I guess in terms of some of the context, this spatial planning process is looking out at substantial timeframes, 30 to 50 years. So it's quite a time frame, and I think it's a bit of a challenge to get one's head around those timeframes. We're not talking about 5 years, 10 years. It's actually looking to the future. But we do need to start acting now to be able to move the ship around, if you like, and move towards that preferred urban form. So not a big change in the strategic direction in terms of the 2023 Christchurch Spatial Plan, which we're engaging on today and through the next few weeks. I guess there's a focus on how we can get that urban form better, ways of implementing key investments and choices to get to that, I guess, better urban form that we all need and want. So we're talking about a population basically doubling over the next 30 to 50 odd years. So we're about just over 500,000 now. So we're talking 1 million people. And current projections, that's going to happen somewhere between 30 and 50 years. Who knows what will happen in the future, but we need to start planning for those long-term outcomes. So look, there's some real, I guess, challenges that we face, and they're the same sort of challenges that we faced back in the 2000s. And it's really around how we accommodate growth, people and businesses, how we move people around from their homes to their workplaces, to their commercial areas, to the recreational areas. And so that movement of people and accommodating growth is a key factor, a key challenge for all of us. I guess protecting some of our productive land is really important as well. We've got the NPS for highly productive land that has just recently been released by the government. That's a factor. It's something we can't ignore. Traditional greenfield all too often spilled over into that highly productive land, which is a finite resource and we need to protect. There's other elements of the environment that are key also in terms of restoration, regeneration, looking after those key bits of what is a highly modified environment right across Canterbury. So it's all about coming up with this, having a well-functioning urban form. A key part of that is it needs to be affordable, accessible, and provides a high quality of life. We also need to provide choice. I think all too often some of the housing choices and the transport choices have been a bit one-dimensional, and there's going to be different needs for different people in different stages of their life cycle. We've seen the events up in the North Island. Climate change is something we just cannot ignore, and we need to address the issues that raises. So there's some of the key challenges that are facing Greater Christchurch and are trying to be addressed through this spatial planning process. Could I have the next slide, please? So one of the key aspects of a spatial planning exercise is to talk about areas that we need to protect and avoid. So we're looking at avoiding, and there's a map up on the screen there in terms of some of those natural hazards. So we've got flooding risk, we've got sea rise risk, we've got earthquake fault lines and rockfall issues on the Port Hills, those areas that are coloured there, orange, yellow. There's also some areas that we need to protect in terms of areas of significance to Māori, the natural environment in terms of some outstanding landscapes and ecological corridors that we need to look after. There's the highly productive land that I've already talked about. water resources, waterways, etc. Look, in some cases, we may be able to have some sort of development or growth in some of those areas, and other places we just need to basically straight out avoid them. One thing I should point out that this map doesn't show important features, sites of significance for Māori, and some of which will be areas to protect and avoid. Tracy talked about the significance of the relationship with mana whenua in an earlier slide. Could I have the next slide, please? So on this slide, I want to talk about some of the, I guess, the challenges that we have, and I've already mentioned some of them. These ones are perhaps particular to Christchurch, and look at how we might start addressing those challenges, and they form the building blocks, you like, of our spatial plan. But one of the key things, the first thing I'll point out is that unlike many other areas in Christchurch, capacity is a huge constraint. There just isn't enough places areas to accommodate a growing population. That is a real problem. In Canterbury, that isn't the case. And I guess it's been one of the reasons why we've been successful, and why perhaps this issue of growing out rather than up has been a real issue for Christchurch and Canterbury. If you think about it, the plains don't offer any substantial physical constraints to greenfield development or development sprawling across the plains with infrastructure chasing along. So that is a unique, I guess, set of, and in many ways we're lucky, but it is a unique situation that does pose its own type of issues and challenges for Christchurch. And I guess the real challenge for Greater Christchurch is focusing growth in a way which improves the functioning of our urban area in the context of growth. So look, some real key specific challenges for Canterbury, Christchurch in particular, I guess, is that we've got a real pattern of dispersal for employment and housing. We're quite spread out. If you think about the key areas where people work across Canterbury, they're all over the place. They're not around the Christchurch city, or they are, but not a lot of it. There's stuff in Hornby, there's stuff over on the eastern side, there's stuff out towards Rolleston, out to Waimakariri and Rangiora. So we're quite dispersed. This has its own flow over effects of, I guess, a big reliance on private vehicles for transport that in turn impacts upon transport emissions. Look, we've got relatively low congestion right now, and it's not such a problem to perhaps hop in your car and move from the eastern part of Christchurch right out through to Selwyn or to Waimakariri using the new motorways. But look, I think there will be an issue of congestion if we continue the same pattern of growth that we currently are moving down. So there's going to be congestion issues, even if not here right now, there will be in the future. Our central city has suffered from the earthquake. It's only in the last year or so that it's been able to bounce back to a degree, but it is still underperforming, and that is an issue we just can't ignore. Christchurch City and its centre is the heart of Greater Christchurch. It is important for Selwyn, it's important for Waimakariri. We need a high-performing, high-functioning, high-value city centre to our city. So I guess our economy overall is relatively low productivity, describe it as that, and we need to, I guess, find a way we can be more of an attractive location with high accessibility, connectivity, and to make sure that business and investment come to Christchurch and its centre. Look, I talked about capacity issues, and I'll drill down into that in a bit further, more detail in the coming slides. What is an issue, and it is right up and down the country, is affordability. And just to give you a rough figure here, there's probably about 35,000 households in the Greater Christchurch area who are suffering affordability issues around housing, and the metric for that is probably that I guess more 30% or plus of your income is used for housing costs. I guess, and I've mentioned this before, our current model of accommodating growth doesn't really pay full respect to looking after some of our finite resources, and in particular highly productive land. And that's something we just can't ignore. It's the food basket for New Zealand in many ways. Canterbury, we've got a lot of highly productive soils, particularly out in Selwyn, and we just need to work out a way we can look after those. So look, there's some of the challenges, and they're not new challenges, but they're real challenges, and they've come, I guess, more sharply into focus following climate change events. The government's highly productive land national policy statement, and these are things that we just need to address. So, in terms of addressing these, the building blocks, if you like, for the spatial plan, it's creating a vibrant central city which attracts business and talent. It's concentrating economic activity in the centre and also in our key centres and townships and areas outside of the central city, so there can be efficient access to employment and, I guess, agglomeration of economic activity. We really need a sustainable and effective means of transport, public transport. Private motor vehicle stuff is just not going to work in the future. It may work for some, but the outcome and the effects that it generates aren't sustainable over a medium term, certainly not over a longer term. We really need more housing choices. So we've been particularly good at knocking out greenfield subdivisions where there's a 3-bedroom house and a double garage and 500, 600, 700 squares of backyard, and that's fine for a young family that has enough income to provide for that. But as people move through their life cycle, there's going to be different needs, and have we got those choices in place? At this point, I don't think so. There's affordability issues that we need to address, and there's different types of living in terms of mana whenua expectations, multi-generational living. So there's basically more housing choice is something that we need to consider and start building towards. Tracy's spoken about Kaianga Nohanga on Maori land, and this is something that we need to strive towards. And really importantly is the restoration of our natural environment in terms of protecting areas where we don't want development, looking after ecological corridors, and importantly, the integration of natural ecosystems into our urban settings. Yeah, if we could move to the next slide, I think I'll cover that one. So in this card slide, I just want to talk a wee bit about capacity, both business, but more importantly, perhaps about housing. Look, as I indicated in the earlier slide, we're quite unique in terms of our ability to accommodate the growth, and we've done a lot of work on this in terms of capacity. So currently, we might be looking at around 77,000 new houses over the next 30 years or so. We should be able to accommodate those. We think that we have enough land to do that, to meet that population growth. I guess the real challenge is how we actually shape that growth into an urban form that we get the outcomes that we're talking about. For business land, our analysis and projections indicate that we've probably got enough industrial land going forward for the next 30 years. And we've got quite a bit of, I guess, vacant industrial areas out towards the west that's becoming available, out towards Hornby and further afield in terms of Rolleston. There are some small capacity constraints that have been identified, but these are likely to be resolved by increased density in urban and town centres and the move west of some industrial activities, and that's for commercial land in particular. So as industrial land migrates out of areas like Sydenham, they may be able to be developed into more commercial business purposes, mixed use type of formats. I've spoken a wee bit about greenfield land, and we have been particularly good at greenfield. I've indicated that I don't think this is going to be sustainable for the future. There will be some greenfield land. We need to make sure that greenfield land is connected to existing urban areas, public transport is available, and that perhaps it's a different type of greenfield in terms of its density, with offering a greater range of housing types within the greenfield subdivisions. But overall, we do need a substantial shift from our traditional way of building and accommodating growth towards a more consolidated, intensified urban form to address those challenges that I spoke about earlier. So look, there's no justification in terms of housing capacity for a whole lot more of greenfield land over the next 30 years as we move towards a population of 1 million, towards 50 years plus, 50 years, 60 years, then perhaps some greenfield stuff. It needs to be carefully considered greenfield. It needs to be perhaps a different type of greenfield. Overall, I guess from my perspective, business as usual in terms of the way we've been doing our urban planning is just not fit for the medium term and particularly for the longer term. We do need to change, and this process of spatial planning is a way of actually getting from where we are now to a preferred urban form and working out a sort of steps along that pathway. I really look forward to the engagement over the next couple of weeks and your input. I think that's me finished. Thanks, guys.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Osborne, and I'm at Wakotahi, the New Zealand Transport Agency. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the mass rapid transit or turn up and go transport system that we're seeking your feedback on. So I think the first thing to think about when you think about this is that it's a city shaping proposal. It's not really a transport proposal per se, and it needs to be done or considered in tandem with your spatial planning like we are doing here, because it is very much dependent upon intensification and growth at the stations and along the corridors. So just bear that in mind when we run through these slides. The other thing to bear in mind is that mass rapid transit is part of a wider work stream. It shouldn't be considered in isolation, and if you do that sort of thinking or that work in isolation, it's kind of doomed to fail. So this is part of the broader PT package of interventions, and the initial kind of part of that was really about getting our existing public transport system up to a reasonable level of service, and that's through increased frequency of service, bus priority lanes, more shelters, real-time information. So just good basic stuff to get the existing public transport system up to a level of service that befits a population the size of Greater Christchurch. And thirdly, again, even PT should not be seen in isolation from anything else. So it's all part of a broader package, and that includes motorways, that includes cycleways, it includes pedestrians. So all of that needs to be considered in the round. Next slide, please. So what we've been doing some work on is looking at a turn up and go type system for Greater Christchurch, and what we're seeking your feedback on is an arterial street running system, which essentially runs from Belfast or just north of there in the north through the central city to Hornby in the southwest. What we're also considering as part of that is direct bus services from the districts that would connect up with that turn up and go type system. So assuming we finish at Belfast, what you get is connection using the motorway corridor from, say, a Rangiora, a Woodend or a Kaipoi to connect up with that. And those people using that could make sure they have a high level of service in terms of getting anywhere they want to within Christchurch City. They can also utilise the express bus service, which will direct bus service, which goes straight to the central city, again using the motorway corridors, but not connecting up with that turn up and go. So from the north, it would connect up with a Cranford Street, and from the south, so Ralston, it would land you on Brougham Street. So that's important as well. And the third part of that is that you need to make sure there's intra-district connectivity as well. So making sure that Rangiora, Woodend and Kaipoi are well connected, as much as you'd have Ralston, Lincoln and Prebbleton. So when you think of those things in the round, what that does is, one, provides you a good level of service within the districts. It provides good connections to the proposed turn up and go service, and it provides good connectivity to the central city of Christchurch. You go to the next slide, please. So the way we would look to, slice and dice this, and bearing in mind not all this work has been completed, and we certainly want to hear back from the community on this, but there would possibly be two phases. The first phase would be to run that turn up and go system from Papanui through the central city and out to Church Corner, as well as making sure that those connections from the districts up to that turn up and go service were implemented, as well as the direct connections to the central city. And then phase 2 would be extending the turn up and go to Belfast in the north and Hornby in the southwest, as well as making sure, again, good intra-district connectivity and connections up to MRT and direct connections into the central city. And that would include, something like an interchange facility at Hornby, park and ride out of Belfast, as well as park and rides out at the key district towns. So that's the way we would probably look to phase it if indeed this is approved, but we are still doing some further work on that. Next slide, please. So the thing about mass rapid transit or turn up and goes type systems is, as I mentioned earlier on, they are city shaping opportunities. And it really does provide an opportunity to reshape our key centres and neighbourhoods along the route. What we need to do if this thing does get approved is maximise the benefits of that kind of high frequency of travel and create more attractive, safer, vibrant and accessible centres. And with that, you'd increase the opportunities for increasing housing and employment density and the scale and nature of urban form. And this is just a schematic that was shown around what something like Church Corner might look, whereby you have your comprehensive developments and a range of housing typologies and densities within a block structure in reasonably close proximity to the new service. Your buildings along the street edge would be a mixture of commercial at the ground floor. Your big box retail, such as your supermarkets and your malls, would be sleeved with retail again. And then you'd make sure you've got safe connections and links through those blocks using a variety of modes. So that is the type of thing that we're considering as to what the future might look like. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So one of the challenges we're working through with the turn up and go system that we're proposing is that some parts of the corridor are only 20 metres wide, which makes it challenging to accommodate mass rapid transit and all the other users. Other parts of the corridor are wider when you look at Main North Road, Main South Road, obviously Manchester Street and even Hagley Ave are a little bit wider, but certainly there are some parts of that corridor that are quite narrow. There's a range of options open to us. In some instances, what we might choose to do is deprioritise through traffic within the corridor, or we might consider transit malls, we might consider purchasing land to make it wider, or we might look at grade separation. And grade separation is really when you're talking about putting something over or under. That has benefits in terms of the free flow of a particular service, but it can be quite disruptive, expensive, and certainly has impacts on the adjacent community next to it. So one of the things we're really keen to get feedback from the community on is the potential for transit malls. And transit malls are really just a section of the street which is dedicated to public transport, public space and active modes. They are being considered in key town centres in order to create an activated destinations to catalyse redevelopment and improve access. And if they are the favoured form in some locations, and we haven't made any recommendation or anything like that, we would need to do quite a bit of neighbourhood planning to address those wider network impacts. So that's something which is very much a work in progress, but we'd be interested in hearing from you as to what you think of those sorts of options. Next slide, please. So there are a couple of options for a turn up and go type service. Most people associate a sort of thing with light rail, but that's certainly not the only option. And when you look at those two pictures there, I mean, to me, they seem quite similar, your light rail or your bus rapid transit. There are pros and cons from both. From bus metro, the trade-offs are really around what costs a little bit less. It is easier to implement because it runs on wheels. There's flexibility to avoid traffic disruption. You get more ability to potentially stage implementation, and if something goes wrong, say there's an accident or something else, and you need to shift off that dedicated route, there is an ability to do that through your bus rapid transit. In terms of light rail, there's some challenges with that, but there's definitely some pros as well. Proximity to the depot from the route, that's something you need to kind of work out, because these things need a place to live once they've finished traipsing people throughout the Greater Christchurch area. Because this line would go over some of the heavy rail lines, you'd need to consider grade separation from heavy rail. So again, quite invasive, potentially expensive, and definitely has an impact on surrounding areas. Part of the benefits of heavy rail, though, is that they are perceived as permanent, and that can be seen as a real catalyst for development. So those people who want to develop adjacent to them, they know that those steel tracks are going to be there for a long period of time, and they have that certainty within which to invest adjacent to that corridor. And that's one of the biggest pros of light rail, as opposed to something that, the bus rapid transit. And they also have a high capacity and ability to couple vehicles, so you can get a lot more people using them. I see there's a few questions, and perhaps I might take the opportunity just to address a few of those issues around connections to the airport and other such things. We did consider and certainly did a lot of investigation into a potential airport route option. The airport is obviously a key employment node, but the challenge with the airport is you have the existing or proposed airport noise contour, and the current policy setting is very much around not having intensification and growth within that contour. So these things are very much dependent on intensification and growth at the stations along the corridor for their success. So it just didn't meet the investment objectives that we had at the beginning of the slide. In terms of rail, I see someone's raised some issues around rail, and it's not something, we certainly considered that, and intuitively, because rail exists and for that reason will always be an option for Christchurch, it's always going to be there as a potential for Christchurch, but there are some real challenges to that, and one of the most obvious ones is the lack of connectivity to the central city, and there would obviously be some kind of need to do that via a tunnel or a trench, and very expensive, very disruptive. And that's the type of thing which is a real challenge to getting these things over the line. When people think of rail, they think it's there, why don't we use it? But there's some real limits to the rail infrastructure that we currently have. You'd need to do a significant amount of double tracking. You'd need to significantly upgrade the signalling infrastructure across the entire network. There's a number of level crossings throughout the central city, and those are fine at the moment when you're only running a limited number of services for freight. but they pose a completely different set of issues if you were to start running a turn up and go type service along that railway line. And the other issue that you'd need to consider, so the infrastructure would be a real issue for heavy rail to use that. The other issue is that if you think about something like putting aside the connection to the central city, if you think about, say, a Riccarton or around there, when you think about Riccarton and Papanui roads, they have some key nodes along them, but they're more development along the corridor. And your heavy rail option does not enable good connectivity and integration with land use along those key corridors where growth is currently going and where it's forecast to grow into the future. So if you did run with the heavy rail option, and it's not something that we're putting forward depending on the feedback from the community, you would still need to do a similar type service as what we're proposing, or certainly a frequent type service along those core corridors as well. So it would be a heavy rail, and it wouldn't just be a heavy rail. But anyway, that's me in terms of my slides, I think, and hopefully I've addressed a couple of the comments that were on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. We're now going to just briefly explain the desired pattern of growth that we're inviting your feedback on. The image on the right represents a simplistic view of how that growth could be accommodated. The proposed focus of growth over the next 30 years being on centres and along the turn up and go corridor that Richard described. The centres being marked with red dots and orange around them representing intensification. We believe a green belt's a useful tool to protect our productive land and also to provide for green and open space for future generations. And that's shown by way of the green dashed bold lines around Christchurch City, but also around our townships. That can provide separation between our city and towns, but also seeks to limit urban sprawl. In order to support this urban form, there'll be public transport enhancements, including completing our current public transport investment plan, building the turn up and go system out to Hornby and Belfast, improving bus frequency and park and ride facilities, and potentially in the future adding an outer orbiter route to connect the north and the west parts of the city. This direction signalled of how we grow is narrower than what has and may be agreed through the decision-making process for the plan changes to implement the government's direction on intensification. It effectively represents where we want growth to happen. And through this partnership between councils, iwi and central government, this provides an opportunity for us to use other tools to incentivise growth in the locations we prefer. So that can include investment in placemaking and development, other incentives such as policy and pricing, and using tools such as significance criteria to provide more certainty of how we apply the national policy statement direction of enabling growth. That's to ensure that development in areas supports rather than undermines the outcome we're seeking to achieve of a well-functioning urban environment. Next slide, please. So looking beyond 30 years to what 1 million people looks like in the sub-region, we'd still like to see growth focused along public transport corridors with associated enhancement to services on those corridors, as well as along other corridors. That includes, for instance, Lincoln Road. We're also expecting a significant shift in the form and function of Hornby over time towards having a stronger commercial element and high density residential development around it, as well as recognising its function as a transport hub and potentially a second sub-regional centre. That's shown on the map as a large red circle in the southwest. Next slide, please. So just touching on our environment and what the spatial plan is also proposing. So alongside managing how we grow, we also want to take actions to better protect and enhance our environment. This reflects strong feedback we've had from the community to date and through the previous conversation on Greater Christchurch 2050. I've already spoken about the green belt as a tool to protect open space and productive land, and beyond this, the national direction in the national policy statement on highly productive land provides clear direction. There are also ways we can improve the natural environment, and that's enhancement to our biodiversity, but also making our city and towns better places for people to live, and integration of green space into development. There's also, as we've seen, an opportunity to build resilience and to be more resilient to the effects of climate change and natural hazards that the last few weeks have shown us what the importance of. Initiatives like stormwater basins, wetlands, and using more porous materials in our hard infrastructure will help to cope better with flooding events, and the creation of more spaces, green spaces and green connections provides an opportunity for nature to thrive in our urban area. We need to prioritise the health of our waterways and water bodies, and recognise that the city and towns are built on a network of rivers, springs and wetlands, and there's an opportunity to support growth, but in a way that is more resilient and more sustainable for the future generations. I'll hand back now to Rebecca.
So thank you to our presenters for the presentation. It's now time to answer some of the questions that have been raised during our discussion, of which there have been quite a number, which is great. You can still ask questions now, just pop them into the chat or email huihuimai@greaterchristchurch.org.nz. So one of the first questions here is for Tim. Tim, if you are able to put your camera and mic on and answer the question around where's the Greater Christchurch in these proposals? Is this just a Christchurch proposal to stop growth in Waimakariri and Selwyn?
Well, the simple answer is no. It's a sub-regional spatial plan. I guess there is, in some ways, a focus on Christchurch City, because that's where the MRT needs to start. It's a multi-generational, multi-billionaire, billion-dollar project that does require a lot of investment. And just in terms of the numbers, we need a population to be able to justify, to be able to make a MRT viable, and that really does shape, as Rich was talking about, the urban form. And we really do need to start pragmatically start at a place that is going to provide those numbers. It's not going to be Selwyn, it's not going to be Waimakariri district. It needs to happen in Christchurch and emanate from there. And to make that happen, I guess then we do need to focus on intensification along those MRT routes. I guess not limit, but sort of think about how we can do different types of greenfield development in the districts where there is actually quite a large capacity at the moment through private plan changes. So it is a Greater Christchurch spatial plan. There needs to be, and rightly so, a focus on Christchurch City and getting that place humming, and then that will start, I guess, shaping the urban form and provide some options for Selwyn and Waimakariri to provide an enhanced public transport system to the ends of the MRT system and then into Christchurch City over time. And it's going to be a lengthy time. You may find there's some options along the existing rail corridors for connections out to Selwyn in particular. But this is really a collaborative effort amongst the partners, and it's been stated earlier in the slides. We've been working on these issues and challenges since before the earthquakes. I don't know if Richard's got or others have got a comment.
We've actually got another question here for Richard, actually. So, Richard, how would heavy rail is not a commuter solution for Selwyn and Waimakariri? How is heavy rail not a commuter solution?
Like I said at the beginning, the railway line is there, so it'll always be a potential option into the future for Greater Christchurch and Canterbury. And indeed, ECAN are doing a bit of thinking around what a passenger rail service might look like. But I have covered off some of the challenges with using the heavy rail lines earlier on. So look, I won't reiterate those, but they are many and varied. And that's not to say that we don't have them with the street running corridor as well. But this one, what we're proposing, certainly profiled better than the heavy rail option. And the most easiest way to think about that is it just it integrates better with land use than heavy rail does when you think about where the growth is and where it's going.
Okay, and don't go away, Richard. There's some more questions for you here. So would the situation around linking the airport change at some point, as it seems to be a major destination, especially for transit, that will likely increase in the future?
Yeah, look, one of the things we're doing at the moment is increasing the frequency of bus services out to the airport. So that's been considered by Environment Canterbury at the moment. But it will really be dependent on what happens in and around the airport, how that grows. And at the moment, that is limited by the airport noise contour. And if you can't intensify and grow from a residential and commercial perspective, obviously they have commercial growth, but if you can't do both, then it's just not going to stack up in terms of what we're proposing here. You're just not going to get the number of people using it, and if you don't get the patronage, then it doesn't make any sense as from an investment proposal.
Okay. And another one for you, Richard. Why is there no what's next plan? For example, the Riccarton line extending east of the city centre to Linwood and the Papanui line extending south to Sydenham or southwest down Lincoln Road. We need to plan more than just the first step.
Yeah, good question. I think we do have, and I think that's 700,000 to $1 million. And one, we'd like to hear that feedback. Two, we've gone for the areas where we think a turn up and go service would have the most chance of success. But you could foresee a future whereby you could run a short run line down to Sydenham, or you could go potentially out to the east to Eastgate or something like that. But again, that would need to be a focus for growth and intensification, both along the corridor and at the stations. And we need to be mindful of actually what our growth forecasts are. So yes, that is not off the table. I think that is indicated in some of our documents and will be a consideration, but we'd like to hear more from you.
Great, thank you, Richard. So it's now time to close the question and answer session. If we haven't had time to answer your question today, we will provide a written answer as part of the information that we send to you and put up on the website after the session today. So to provide feedback on what you've heard today, please complete the online survey if you haven't already. If you're wanting to be part of a more in-depth discussion, please register for one of the workshops that you'll see on the screen there. We also have a series of drop-in sessions being held across the area. So all the feedback will be collated and used to inform the development of the draft Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan and Mass Rapid Transit indicative business case. The next steps after that is for the draft spatial plan to be put out for consultation later in 2023. If the MRT indicative business case is endorsed, it will unlock the next step for a detailed analysis and planning for the business case. All the information that you've heard today and on how to be involved, go to our website www.greaterchristchurch.org.nz. So thank you everyone for taking your time out of your day to join us. If you have any more feedback about the session or have any more questions, please contact the team at huihui@greaterchristchurch.org.nz. We'll be in touch over the coming days with answers to your questions and links to watch this session. Thanks again from myself and all of our team, and enjoy the rest of your day. Tēnā koutou katoa.